Hello everyone and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. This video has been some time in the making. I find that I don't have a lot of spare time, or perhaps it's better to say that I wish I had much more spare time than I do. The little time that I have, I need to divide between writing, reading, or making videos. Many times I choose reading over working on a video. So finally I can share my thoughts with you on reading the 4 books in the Riftwar Saga by Raymond E. Feist last May and June. I'll try to stay away from major spoilers, but here and there I cannot escape revealing some things of the plot. If you haven't read these books yet, this video may not be for you. The entire Riftwar series contains 30 or even more books. I didn't count them really. I just read the first series published from 1982 to 1986. That are these books. I read the 4-book variation in which Magician is separated into 2 books, Apprentice and Magician. As it says on the cover, it's the author's preferred edition. So, can't go wrong there. Let's start off with the first one, Magician Apprentice. This one I read in May and it's 485 pages. The servant boy Pug becomes apprentice to Kulgon, magician and advisor to the Duke of Cridi or Cridi. Pug grows increasingly frustrated by his lack of progress in his magical studies. During a horse riding trip with the Princess Carleen, they are attacked by 2 wild trolls. In dire straits, Pug somehow finds access to his magic and kills both trolls. This introduces the huge promise Pug holds for the rest of the story. The magic system is hardly explained, which is fine with me. A story can work very well without extensive explaining of details or backgrounds. The why or how can remain irrelevant. However, now that I've had my first experience with reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, his so-called heart magic system certainly nourishes my imagination. Back to the story. An alien vessel shipwrecked on the shores of Cridi introduces the first signs of what is to become the Riftwar. Through a mysterious rift, people from another world invade Midkemia. On their own world, they hardly have any steel resources. So they, the Tsurani, they come from the empire Tsuranwani, which is part of the world Kerewan. They come to Midkemia to steal their resources in iron and steel. This war will drag on for many, many years. The absolute highlight of this book for me was the part where Pug's childhood friend Thomas and Dolgan, the dwarf, meet Ruark. He is a golden dragon. The dragon is dying of old age and requests the human and the dwarf to hold his death watch. It is the way of my people to sit the death watch, but there are none of my kind near enough to call. I would ask thee to wait for my passing before thy leaving. Wilt thou? This touching scene has everything I look for in fantasy: beauty, reverence, wisdom, purpose, and so on. Raymond E. Feist manages to find a perfect balance between story development, action, characterization, mystery, world building, and so on. I also applaud his writing skills. One example of this: I fear we will all be in deep water soon, my Lord Boric. I pray that this invasion you speak of will not be the wave that drowns us. Up until about 75% of this book, I was thoroughly enjoying myself. However, from then on, the seemingly endless battle sequences take up the rest of the book, which stalls the development of the story. we lose sight of Pug, which is a pity. Because of the highs and the lows, I cannot rate this book higher than 4 stars out of 5. The second book, Magician Master, I read in June, and it contains 499 pages. In this book, Pug, who is taken prisoner to Tsuranwani, rises to become one of the most powerful wizards. I love these learning stories, academy or university. These chapters where the apprentice Pug finds his way to becoming a master of wizardry stand out to me the most, especially the ritualistic nature of the narrative. During his 4 years of training, he is asked the same questions over and over, like this one. In what manner are you allowed to serve? He never knew what to answer to these questions until one day it came to him, as I see fit. Another question he answers, as he has done from the beginning. Where is your allotted place? My place is here. Apprentices wear white and are not allowed to talk, let alone ask questions. That night, a man in a dream tells Pug, consider this, you are the architect of your own imprisonment. The next day, Pug walks up to his guide and says, this is no longer my place. These turn out to be the magical words for him to change from apprentice white to the grey of the next level. In another dream, the same man tells him that what the masters teach him is useful, but never accepts the proposition that just because a solution satisfies a problem, that it must be the only solution. In the dream, the man picks up a spider from a flower and puts it back on another flower. He asks Pug, who has been renamed to Melamba, do you think the creature knows that this is a different flower? To which Melamba answers, I don't know. That is perhaps the wisest of all answers. I love that. One of the most enjoyable characters, no doubt to me, is Amos Trask, the ship's captain. His language is coarse, but inventive. This ship's a slab-sided, wattle-bottomed, water-rotted coaster, Highness, but she'll make it through if I have to pick her up and carry her. Behind Amos's rough exterior hides a wise man. You know what it is to laugh at death, Arutha? You'll never be the same man again. It is something a few know in their lives. It is a vision of something so clear, so true, it can only be a madness. You see what life is worth, and you know what death means. Later on, Amos Trask portrays himself accurately. Take any deep-water sailor who's faced death at sea as many times as I have, and scratch him lightly. Underneath, you'll find a philosopher. No fancy words, I'll warrant you, but a deep, abiding sense of his place in the world. The extensive pages on politics didn't do much for me. Most of the people involved here somehow remain side characters to me, so I couldn't care less who'd come out on top of the political games. The final chapters of this book were a bit of a letdown to me, mainly because of this. I've also discovered that descriptions of war, battle scenes are not my favorite kind of reading material. Perhaps that may change, but so far the only battle scenes that I enjoyed somewhat are those in the Wheel of Time. Perhaps it is as one of the characters at the end of this book says, I'm getting too old for much more of this nonsense of war and politics. Even though much of this book still gets me excited, like the way Thomas transforms into one of the gods of old, the Valeru, much of it got me bored. For that reason, also a 4-star out of 5. The third book, Silverthorn, has 343 pages, and I also read this one in June. I found this the least of the 4 books in the Riftwar Saga. The first half of this book seems to tell a non-essential story to the series, and its pacing is very slow compared to the other ones. In an assassination attempt on Prince Arutha, his wife, Princess Anita, is struck by a poisonous bolt. The entire rest of the book is about this quest of Arutha and his party looking for the antidote, which is to be found in the extremely rare plant Silverthorn. As with the other books, there are many highlights, but overall I found myself wanting to read more about Pug, who gets very little page time in the beginning. Still, there's a lot to enjoy. For instance, the characters of Amos Trask, whom I already mentioned, and Jimmy the Hand. And also the writing itself remains high level. How about this metaphor, where Jimmy finds that life used to be much simpler? He tried to put on a brighter expression, but at best he resembled a cat who had fallen into a barrel of cream, unsure of whether to lap it up or swim for his life. I also enjoyed little things like the way Feist illustrates the importance or meaning of protocol. When two parties meet, the men perfunctorily touched index finger to heart, lips and forehead, a gesture indicating a generous heart, a truthful tongue, and a mind harboring no deceit. Beautiful. From around page 250, I enjoyed this book better. The pacing has picked up by then, and more reference to the overall story make it intriguing. We see more of the nature of the enemy, the overall danger that threatens both worlds of Midkemia and Kerawan. The ending, where Pug in the far north of Kerawan finds a hidden society of ancient elves, is nothing less than magical. In short, Silverthorn does suffer from middle book syndrome in my view, but it still wonderfully sets the stage for the last part in this series. 3.5 stars out of 5. The final installment, A Darkness at Sethanon, has 430 pages, and I read this one also in June. This book contains everything that makes fantasy my go-to genre. The entire sequence where Pug and Thomas, in their search for the wizard Macros, meet with the owl, some sort of ethereal being, in their surrealistic environment, kept me on the edge of my reading seat. Next to this quest, the book describes the battles and sieges. Murmandamus, the ally of the enemy or the Valeru, and his army eventually try to overtake Sethanon, because there lies hidden some sort of portal through which the Valeru can return and reclaim their dominion over the worlds of humans, elves and dwarves. Even though the war chapters aren't my favorite, there are some hidden gems here. He picked up a small felt hammer and rang a tiny gong. Listen. Baru closed his eyes in meditation, listening to the sound as it faded, diminishing, becoming fainter. When the sound was fully gone, Charles said, "Find where the sound ends and silence begins. Then exist in that moment, for there will you find your wall. It is your secret center of being, the perfect place of peace within yourself." Once Pug and Thomas have found Macros, the old wizard reveals to them the history of the universe on a surrealistic journey through time. This is a continuous highlight of the entire series for me, and one that I will think back on regularly. Nothing is forever, Pug. Nothing. Immortality, power, dominance, all are illusions. Don't you see? We are simply pawns in a game beyond our understanding. Finally, the three arrive at the beginning of everything. It was impossible to comprehend. They see unexplainable things and experience emotions that cannot be put into words. They see the hand of God, the prime urge, the first cause, the ultimate. I don't know what to call it. I know only this. One moment there was nothing, the next all existed. It is the first mystery, and even now that I've seen it, I do not pretend to understand it. This kind of storytelling is right up my alley. The war fought in this part of the series is by far the most interesting because other elements than swordsmanship or strength are involved. Nevertheless, compared to the chapters where Pog, Macros and Thomas are unraveling the whole universe, this whole warfare seemed redundant to me, almost irrelevant really. I admire how Feist brings the two stories together, where the war on Midkimia and the urge of the Valeru, the gods, to reawaken suddenly align. There are plenty of surprising plot twists. In the end, everything is explained in a convincing way and in an overwhelming and somewhat bombastic finale. This book I give 4.5 stars out of 5. All in all, I would highly recommend this series, even though it contains some slug and less interesting parts. But the highs trump the lows in the end. Making this video made me realize a couple of things concerning my journey into fantasy. One is that some of my preferences and dislikes are gradually surfacing. Wars, politics, and too far away side stories that add nothing to the main story are not my cup of tea. On the other hand, rituals, learning curves, greater than life occurrences, and philosophical content tend to grasp my focus. We'll see if these will amplify or change in the near future as I continue to be reading much more fantasy. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.